Welcome to VeloUnlocked, the podcast for baseball players that want to play at the next level. In this episode, we are joined by Joe Sorsa, a longtime Velo U athlete who made his MLB debut this season. Joe tells the wild story of how he went from a walk-on at St. John's University to a viral baseball player in the World Baseball Classic to a MLB reliever with the Washington Nationals.
Joe, first off, thanks for coming here. I know we're interrupting your training schedule right now, but appreciate you taking the time. And I really feel like today, you have such a unique perspective on not just like the game of baseball, but also how to go about it. And I think your perspective has evolved a lot over the last couple of years. But I'd really like to start all the way back because I think the interesting paradigm here will be to hear you describe what high school was like now and the importance or lack thereof in the grand scheme of life. So let's start off like high school career, especially with the fact that, essentially you were a recruited walk-on, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I remember high school being a time where it's very difficult because it's like how I've always described the baseball world. It's baseball, it's a sport, but then when you look at it from the top, if you're trying to make it as high as possible, you look at it almost like a job. And when you first come in and you're in high school, you're in this giant pool of players and everybody, people don't really know who's good yet. Kids look good. Kids look like they have potential. And, I remember high school being in baseball being such a difficult time because I would play well, but because I didn't have the stuff or the projectability, I was viewed less. And as opposed to there were some kids that I would look at and they would be getting crazy offers and looks from professional scouts and whatnot. And I'd be thinking like, wow, this is crazy. Like this kid that can't perform or can compete and help us win ball games. He's getting this opportunity to, like go on this visit to this school or go here. And I remember that was tough because I was barely being recruited at all. The only thing that I had was my left-handedness, which has helped me a lot throughout the way. And I was a tall, lanky pitcher at the time. Other than that, I really had nothing else to me. I just threw strikes and the ball moved a little bit. I didn't really have anything to go with it, and I definitely did not throw hard. So that was pretty much, it was an uphill battle my whole high school career, even though I was a good player. Trying to go on towards the next level was something that I always wanted to do after my sophomore year when for our JV city championship, I played at St. John's because the city championship for the CHSAA is held at St. John's. I remember going there and my dad being like, oh, like you're going to be playing at St. John's. And I had no idea what the school was. I wasn't even really thinking about college baseball because I didn't know after my freshman or sophomore year in high school if I was good enough to play college baseball. But then after that point, once I started to hear that like, oh my God, and then playing on that field, I literally fell in love with that place and I wanted to play at that place indefinitely. And, like obviously going through high school, my junior and senior year, that's really all that I ever wanted to go to. I wasn't getting recruited anywhere else and I wasn't really even getting recruited by St. John's.
All right. Wait. So let's hold on there. So clearly we are, and I'm going to obviously be jumping in here periodically to just stop the story because I know you can go with the whole thing. But so late bloomer for sure in terms of talent. But, I think there's one underlying thing, and I think we'll keep coming back to it time and time again as we go through this conversation, which was you could still perform. You didn't have the velo, you didn't have the movement per se. And I think likely at this point being a little difficult on yourself or being a little hard on yourself rather, because of now what you've experienced and what you know about your capacity to create movement and so on and so forth. And the game has changed a lot since you've been in high school. But I distinctly remember a story that was told to me by Corey Mascara about you when he was actually coming to watch you pitch. And I think I had talked to him when you first got called up in the MLB. And he referenced the story of you running up to him after pitching in a game and saying to him, "Hey, I'm coming to your school," and you were demanding the recruitment at that point in time. Did I butcher that, or is that close? Or
No, that is true because St. John's for the class of 2016, their recruited class was already filled. They gave out all their scholarship money and they were already over recruited and they had more than enough players. And I was kind of in contact with this guy, and he was like, "If you want to come here, sure, but we can't guarantee you anything. You can try and walk on. We don't really have any spots for you, whatever." And that was my senior year or something. And I remember, ironically, he was coming to look at, and this was a playoff game in high school, and he came to look at this other kid. I believe he definitely wasn't a pitcher, and I believe he was a hitter, and I don't know who this kid was. It doesn't matter. But he came to look at this kid. And obviously the kid went over on the day because I threw a no hitter in the first round of the playoffs. And I remember going up to him after and just being like, kind of like a Kirk Cousins, like, "You like that? Like, can I, like, I want to be a Johnny. Like, I want to come to your school, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "Yeah, like, sure, we'd love to have you, like, blah, blah, blah." And it was very nonchalant. It was almost like, okay, this kid's just throwing himself at me, you know. Yeah, I mean, that was
But I
pretty
think
much
he
it.
loved it because it obviously stuck with him because he remembered that enough for us to talk about the situation. What, 5, 6, 7 years later. So all right, so now we get recruited, right? We're headed to St. John's. Um, Talk about your experience there in terms of, you know, you're a recruited walk on. Like that's not an easy place to be going into a Division 1 school, especially at that time, which, it was a mid-major powerhouse. It was really which they still are, and they were recognized nationally right then as being something in the Northeast that was to be reckoned with. What was that experience like to have to come out of, like, you weren't one of these paid guys on that team?
Yeah, they had a lot of top recruits that somehow our recruiting coordinator convinced them to forego the draft. And 2 out of my 3 years at St. John's, we were a top 25 baseball team. We got an at-large bid and won our uh, conference tournament. And my freshman year being there, we were a top 25 team preseason too. And it was really tough because in the fall, I see all these kids who, at the time, this was 2016, when you were throwing over 90 in college, that was considered good, and they were good. And there I was throwing like 85, 87, maybe topping 88. And all these kids were definitely professional caliber, big name guys, and they were all very good. And there I was just kind of in the corner as like a reserve guy. Like, some like, well, if all these guys get hurt and, or maybe something goes bad, but like, they were probably, because in the fall, they were well over roster. They were like 4 or 5 guys over roster. So I remember thinking, like, if I could just stay on and like maybe redshirt, that'd be good. Because all I wanted to do was just play college baseball at the time and just keep on progressing from there and literally just keep on playing as long as I could. But if I had to redshirt, it wouldn't have mattered to me because it would have showed that, like, okay, I made the team. Because like
Can
being
we
at a
hold up right there?
yeah.
Just because the reason I want to hold up is this: it's an interesting mindset that you had right there that you just pointed out. The fact that all you wanted to do in the world was play college baseball right then. Where, listen, there is certainly some guys in our facility now, as you're aware of, that have some, pro exposure, right? Where that's they're already getting seen at the high school level. And it seems as though they make this commitment to a school sometimes and they're already looking at, oh yeah, well, I'm going to be a pro. And they often forget how difficult that next step is going to be. And they're usually some of the first to get punched right in the mouth when they get to college and realize, oh my God, everybody's so much better than me, or at least as good as me. How much do you think it benefited you being behind the 8 ball like that and having to fight out of that?
Well, that's probably why I'm at where I'm at right now, because I've never got, or I've never been full of myself, and I've never been overconfident or cocky in any way. Because I distinctly remember my senior year of high school, and this like saying has stayed with me for a while. My high school coach everyone at the time was like committing places. Kids weren't like playing their varsity seasons to go to some perfect game tournament or to try and get recruited. And he made a really good point about, he's like, everyone wants to go play at the next level. Everyone wants to try and get drafted. Everyone wants to play in college, blah, blah, blah. He's like, how about you focus on being the best player you can be at the level you're at right now? And that being like, okay, well, I'm a senior in high school. Let me try and be the best player I can be. I wasn't thinking about getting drafted at all because I knew that was not a possibility for me. I mean, I was told by schools that like, well, if you don't throw 90, you can't play here. So if I can't play at Division 1 or just college, how was I ever going to be thinking about the draft? So I never thought about it, and no one was ever came up to me. I didn't fill out any profiles or whatever, anything in high school. And then in college, I was barely recruited. I had one offer and I decided to not take that because I wanted to go play at the highest level possible because that's what I wanted to be at, that exposure, because maybe there was potential that I could play afterwards, or I just wanted to be in a good team and see how far my college career could go. And then from there, I took that into my freshman year where everyone's thinking about like, oh, like kids were coming in and talking about how much money they turned down from the draft. And I was like, geez, like I'm walking on here and you guys are talking about how much money you just forgo. And they lost that gamble in the end. But I remember my freshman year, all I wanted to think was like, oh, just make the team and try and be the best freshman that you can be. And then I ended up being an All-American because of that. And then sophomore year, all conference, because I just want to be a really good sophomore. I wasn't thinking about, oh, now we got to go play summer ball, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And anytime that I have gotten ahead of myself, I've ended up doing bad because I start thinking about the future as opposed to the here and the now. And then the best thing that I've ever done was take that mentality my junior year, because once you become a junior, that's when you're draft eligible. And then finally, during that time period, everyone is always getting bombarded with, if you're just coming off a summer of playing in Cape Cod or Team USA, you have all these agents or advisors in that period, and what they're called, coming up to you and, hey, I know this scout, they say you're going to go high, sign with me so I can get a part of your bonus, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I turned them all down. I wasn't with any advisor, which definitely affected my stock because I had no one to negotiate me in the war room. But I turned all those down because I didn't have anyone going
So
into.
quickly there, you wouldn't advise that though to somebody that has some decent chance.
Get it, because you're going to go higher and get more money, and it's going to help you in the long run.
Okay, go ahead.
You don't want to get
I don't
into.
want to interrupt you.
But you don't want. Yeah, I'll get to why that's bad. But I had no one because all I wanted to do was focus on how good of a career I wanted to have at St. John's. And that was more important to me at the time, was winning and helping my team get back to a regional and winning a conference championship, because we were very depleted. We lost about 5-6 guys to the MLB draft in 2018. So a lot of our team did not return. We were really bad. And partly to mention is I came off the summer playing in the Cape after my sophomore year, heading into my junior year. I was a mid-major reliever. So like the one thing about my career is I understood everything very well. I'm very realistic, and I understand what's going on around me. I'm not delusional, and I get a really good feel as to like what's right and what's wrong. That hasn't limited me. I've always tried to go above and beyond, but the way I carry myself out of it, I try to make sure like, no, that's ridiculous. So in hindsight, if I'm the father or if I'm like a guardian of some kid, that, meaning me, is a reliever at a mid-major, that reliever, number one, not a starter. So like your stock goes down already there. At a mid-major, so you're not like some
stock goes down in the draft.
Yeah, so you're not some Power 5 arm that's throwing 100 at an SEC school with 25 innings and you get drafted in the top 10 rounds, because like that's what'll happen there. With me, reliever, mid-major school, and most importantly, didn't have stuff, didn't throw hard. So I'm thinking, I'm not gonna get drafted my junior year. I just want to have the best junior I could possibly have. And I came into my junior year as a reliever, and then kids got hurt. Kids squandered their opportunity, and then eventually they threw me a starting spot, and I took it and ran with it. And I think that year I had the 7th or 8th lowest ERA in the nation in D1. I'm like seventh or eighth all-time career at level in terms of ERA at St. John's, behind like John Franco or Frank Viola, who are like borderline Hall of Famers. And I wanted to just think about doing as well as I could possibly in college and finish up my career. And then when the draft came, it's like, okay, like let's focus on the draft. Because I didn't want to get in my head, well, I have a game this Friday, and I don't want to think about like, oh, well, I have this team coming, whatever. And like my advisor is saying this. So I was just focusing on baseball because I wanted to be as good as I could possibly be. Now, heading into Pro Bowl, that definitely put me behind the eight ball because I was an 18th round pick. I'm behind like 19 or 20 other guys, including comp picks and all that. And everyone else that the Rays drafted is very, very good. A lot more money, way more talented. And I'm the like 18th, 19th, or 20th guy that, was on. So like even though they picked me, they passed up on me a lot of times. And, a lot of those kids did not make it past the 2-year mark in Pro Bowl. A lot of those kids ended up getting hurt, and there's only been 2 big leaguers from that class as of right now, from the 2019 class, and we're about 3 or 4 years removed from that. Obviously, I'm sure there will be more, but I was one of the first from that class somehow, and heading into that summer was tough because then what I found is there is a very there's a cycle in baseball that I've been seeing from when you go from high school to college to the minor leagues. Every level you move up, and then the big leagues, and then even there are so many intricate levels in the big leagues. Is that when you become good or you keep getting better, you get to be the big fish in the small pond. And as soon as you get to a point where you move up or you go to this next level or this higher job requirement of maybe you're the eighth inning guy and you were offered this contract, or like you're now the Friday guy, you keep moving up that rung, and every time it gets harder and harder, and the competition gets smaller but way more competitive, and it is incredibly difficult to keep on navigating that every single time and to keep on climbing and fighting through that.
So, okay. Let's backtrack just a touch there, right? So I want to bring you all the way back. So it's our junior year, right? We finished with a good year, and we're obviously set up pretty strong for the draft. I remember you had a stretch there though in that junior year. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was in our junior year that you were struggling a little bit with location, or they were getting bleeders hit off of you. Yeah, and I remember the two of us are on the phone and we're talking. Now, granted, you had just come off of phenomenal freshman year, right? And we're high, and you indicated this yourself. When you get comfortable or when you're feeling really good, all of a sudden you let up off the gas a little bit and things start to unravel. Um, I remember having the conversations with you game after game, and where we just couldn't get out of this little rut, right? Baseball was going on. You were just battling, and bleeders were happening, an error here, this thing. And it was just one unlucky thing after another. And before you know it, you had amassed like, I think it was like 3 or 4 appearances in a row. And you were just like, I don't understand what to do. I don't know how it's going to ever get better. And I think it was like your 4th or maybe 5th one in a row. And to break it, I think I had said to you, hey, I just want you to understand one thing. This is not going to be the worst time you have with baseball. And you started laughing because you couldn't fathom feeling worse than you did in that moment in time. And obviously we've had worse times than that since, ups and downs, and a lot of positive ones as well. But we're headed now to the draft time period for you, right? And the reason I wanted to just stay here going off of this, because I know you had a really good first year, right? In pro baseball. You made the All-Star game, right, for your level. And I want to understand the dynamic, and even talking about the draft leading to that year that you had that was really good. You had mentioned briefly, hey, I didn't get an agent. I didn't have an advisor. I needed somebody to negotiate for me. And you indicated that if I'm a reliever, my stock isn't going to be as high. And in in a brief way, let's shed some light on what that really means for some of these listeners.
Well, when you don't really have exposure to someone fighting for you, you just put yourself more and more behind the eight ball, because what they do is like they're the guys that's supposed to have the connections with the scouts and the, whatever, and they're the people that are supposed to constantly be like, hey, like, come here, watch this guy, or constantly be throwing your name around in the draft room, and they're uh deciding on who and when they want to take them and blah blah blah. And when you really don't have that exposure, there's definitely a level of, like, oh, this guy doesn't have an advisor, or this guy doesn't have an agent. So around the draft time, I remember when I was like, because I was getting the phone calls from almost every team, and I was talking to them and filling out questionnaires. And like every time they would call me or talk to me, and they'd be like, oh, and like, who's your agent? And I'd be like, well, I actually don't have one right now. They're like, oh, really? Like, it would almost be like they were happy because it's like, oh, great, we can screw this kid over.
Or I was just
like,
going to ask if you felt taken advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. They were like, okay, great. Like, we can hold off on this kid. He's
Right.
not going to get picked. We can pick other people that we think are more important than him. And this kid that's also pretty good, we can like keep him. We don't have to waste top 10 round money or, pay him
So
a
do
little
you
bit
feel
more.
as though it made you look less professional, less, they didn't have to negotiate as hard with you?
Yeah, they could put me on the back burner. It's almost like when you're at a bar or whatever, and it's like you try, talking to the hot girl, but like, you have this like 5 or 6 waiting for you that really wants you.
Okay.
But then you like, if you fail with that one, it's like, well, whatever. Like, okay, like we drafted
I got
that
the
one, but
backup.
like now let's go to the backup,
No, I
whatever.
gotcha.
But the backup apparently was just as good. So,
She brought other things to the table.
yes.
So okay. So now let's transition to we're coming out of our first year. What was your first year in pro ball like? Like, did from what you perceived it was going to be like, how did it live up to that?
It was a step up for me in every aspect, because although I came from a Division I school, and Division I schools have grown exponentially in every category imaginable, just if we're just going to point one thing, like amenities, for example, and travel and luxury and whatever, like I love St. John's. Everyone there will admit it though. Like, might have been a Division I team, but we operated like a junior college. We were very underfunded. We were very hard nosed and gritty. I mean, there were times where we're taking ground balls underneath a parking garage on pavement because there's snow everywhere. So that's the type of school that we were coming from. We didn't have pre or post game spreads. We didn't have luxurious travel. We didn't have all this fancy amenities. We had the smallest locker room imaginable. And then when I got the pro ball, I go into a low A clubhouse, which is categorized as rookie ball. Rookie ball, anything, even A ball, anything is like, ugh, you're an A ball, or oh, you're in low A, and like everything is terrible. You have crap trainers, you got terrible amenities, no work can be done, you have no space for anything. But for me, coming from my program, that was a jump up. That was like a significant, like, oh my God. And then I remember one of my good friends who from Oklahoma, he's like, oh my God. Like, it was just different, because he's like, where they're coming from, if you're coming from A&M or, UCLA or Vandy or Clemson or Florida, like if you're coming from some big Power 5 school, like if you go into pro ball, it is a reality check, because everything that they have these kitchen dining areas, whatever, like, forget about that. We didn't even have pre or post game spreads. We like, the best we ever had was frozen Smuckers during a doubleheader. That was the only thing that we got. And now that I'm like, oh my God, like we're getting fed before, like I don't need to like buy food before a game and then immediately after the game go and fuel up so that I can keep my weight, whatever. And that was like, and I was on cloud 9 that whole summer, because I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like a true professional. And looking back on it, it's like my standards were so low because of where I was coming from. But that's everything pretty much how it was, like we had very,
What about the competition?
Well, the competition, it finally felt like an even playing field, because I'm always looking at these kids. Like, you can compare stats in, college baseball, but if that kid played in the SEC, their ACC, it's like it's almost like taking AP classes in high school, where it's like both kids have a 3.5, but that core 3.5 versus the AP 3.5, it's weighted differently. So the 3.5, or even if it's like slightly lower, that
Sure.
one's
It was
more.
equal.
So like if it, yeah. So coming into pro ball, it's like finally the playing field's level. You don't have to be like, oh, well, this kid's, there. It's like everyone was equal, and it's just like play baseball. And then finally from there, seeing kids throw hard and like, oh wow, they actually aren't doing well. Or maybe kids that are scrappy hitters, they're getting hits off of, hard pitching and whatnot. It was finally for the first time in my life where I actually felt like the playing field was equal and level. And I just I knew how to handle it. Other kids I feel like were kind of taking advantage of. It was like, oh, well, my agent or like this guy I know that is in AA, whatever. They all say that like A ball is useless. It's whatever. Rookie ball is like they don't care about your first year. They don't care about your stats, whatever. But I'm thinking like, well, no. And I had no other option. I had to be good. Otherwise, I thought like every time that everywhere that I've been at, I've always been like a underdog behind the eight ball type player. So everywhere that I've been, I always had this thing of like, if I have a bad season, I'm getting cut and released. My career's over, and then I need to go get a job.
So
And
yeah, I mean, knowing you for as long as I've known you, which is an incredibly long time, you've utilized fear in an incredibly beneficial way for yourself. You've channeled it quite well. All right, so we're coming out of our first year, which is rookie ball at the time, and we have a successful year. We're going into the off season, and boom, halfway through the off season hits COVID.
yeah. So that was a very difficult off season because that was the longest off season ever. Because I was training to train like a normal spring training heading into 2020. All I wanted to do was just make a full team. I wanted to just make low A out of the lowest level of A ball out of camp and not go to extended because I was so fearful of extended because you hear these horror stories about extended and how terrible it is and how if you go there your career is going to die and they don't take kids seriously there and that's for the kids that don't matter or whatever, blah blah blah. And I'm at spring training in 2020 and I'm having a blast. That's like the first time I'm really looking at big league games. And after every day of practice, I'd immediately rush up to the big league side of spring training to go watch the big league games just to see what it was like. And then 2 weeks in, after all this hard training, being in the off season, just finished up my degree. Had to wear it at home, brutal weather, didn't really have a good environment around me because there weren't any other pro guys in my position. So I was really all on my own. And then the whole lockdown happens, go home, and I remember now it's all coming back to me. The 2 weeks to slow the spread or to stop the curve or whatever. And it literally lasted a whole entire year. And I couldn't believe that, like, wow, I just lost a whole entire year. And what happened there was I was working so hard. I was in contact with the Rays. I was constantly telling coaches what to do. And there was a instructs that they had at the end of the year. And that showed me everything that I needed to know about where I stood because I wasn't invited to it. And all these kids were that they considered prospects or kids that they wanted to keep around, no matter how good I was progressing, no matter how much video that, or no matter my all-star before or whatever, it's like they still were like, okay, like this kid really doesn't matter. All the top 10 kids came, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't go to that. So that's when I knew like, okay, like no matter how good I did last year or what they think of me or what they've told to me, it's like I'm still on the back burner with them. They still won't take me seriously and they have other kids that they care about because, they put millions of dollars into some kids or 500,000, whatever. And I wasn't that. But heading into that fall, they did give me an opportunity and some other kids to go play winter ball and they wanted me to go play in Australia. And I was super eager to go do that. And I was training really hard and I was so excited and I was ramping up for it because just the whole,
Well, the ramp up was very fast because
it was, but I think everyone during that time period, there were a lot of kids that ended up getting hurt. And a lot of things happened because there was so much ambiguity of, are we going to have a season? And then some kids just didn't do anything until 21 spring training. And then they would blow out, get hurt, their careers would be over, blah, blah. Other kids were training year round, but then there were points where they were like, oh, keep training, keep throwing. And then there was a point where it's like, okay, everyone, like, we're not going to have this was like in like August or September. And they're like, all right, turns out we're not going to have a season. It's like, yeah, we know. We just spent the whole year home. And then they were like, okay, we want everyone to shut down right now. And then after getting shut down for 30 days, they're like, okay, well, like now some of you guys are going to go play in winter ball, and then you're going to go on from there. And then like I had to get ramped up real quick. And I ended up like spraining or straining something in my arm, unfortunately, which didn't allow me to go to Australia, because I really just wanted to get out of New York and just go play somewhere. And that would have been the first time I would have traveled, and that meant outside of the country. And that would have meant a lot to me. And not having that happen, it's like, great. Well, I didn't even go to Instructs now. And then I didn't play in winter ball. And I'm like, great. Now they're probably going to cut me or release me when I report to spring training in 21.
Now, this was your first ever occurrence of really having an injury, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how damaging is this? Because I mean, essentially at this point, right, your entire makeup is built on the fact that I'm behind the 8 ball. I can conquer anything. Doesn't matter how good these guys are. I can outlast them. I can beat them. I can survive. But now you're hurt.
Yeah, that was tough. But the only saving grace that I had was that it was during an off season. So thankfully it wasn't as bad as when it is in season, because the tool to have in season is availability. No matter how good you are, and I'm sick and tired of hearing it with all these players that are so good, but they're constantly hurt, staying off the field. If you're not healthy or able to play, you're pretty much useless. Doesn't matter how good your metrics or your X plus, whatever. It's ridiculous.
Now let's go back to that time period real quick, because I know something interesting happened during that time period for you that opened your eyes up a little bit to how your training might be changing now moving forward. If you seem to remember, there was a huge shift in your training protocols during that time where we had said, listen, we have this time period where we're not going to be throwing. Let's look to really conquer some of these things that maybe we haven't been able to do because the throwing volume's been so high for all these other years. Let's put on weight. Let's really tack on some strength and let's address some of these issues. And I think you came out of that injury throwing the hardest you've ever thrown in meaningless bullpens indoors.
Yeah. When I had I didn't have an option where the only thing that I could do was really just work out and gain weight. That's when I put out about 25 to 30 pounds, went from 200 to 230. And then I showed up to 21 spring training in the best physical condition that I ever was in, throwing the hardest, where my physicality and my mechanics were synced up really well. And I was confident, and I really had no other option at that point, because I had to come into spring training and really, giving it my all. But the throwing aspect and the lifting aspect, when I had to be like shut down for 3 months because something happened in my arm and I wasn't able to throw. But during that period, thankfully, because spring training was pushed back a month because of the overlapping, and they don't want the big league club and the minor leaguers coming into camp. And that was still in 21 when COVID was still lingering around. Thankfully, I didn't miss spring training because I was shut down, whatever. So I was just working out. I really pushed myself in weight, like really pushing myself with dieting. And, this wasn't something that I did in college. Although I was strict and regimented with the routine of lifting and eating, whatnot, it wasn't enough or up to the standards where I needed to be to actually have gains.
Well,
to actually
perhaps
progress.
It didn't rise. Your attention to it didn't rise in the same way the caliber of competition rose.
Yeah, definitely the demand for it showed that like I really need to go above and beyond, because I remember being I had the frame for it, but I didn't have the size for it, because there were kids in pro ball even at 21 years old in low A. These kids are really big looking, and I'm like, wow. Yeah, they start to really look like men as opposed to college boys.
So
at that point.
you come out of that, right? You've put on all this weight. You're now throwing the hardest you've ever thrown, or having at least the potential to throw the hardest you've ever thrown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're heading into camp. How much does that anchor your confidence now, in the sense that here it was again, another opportunity for your career to basically go away, and you're now hurt. You're not getting invited to these camps. COVID's destroying your opportunity to, because I mean, without playing, right, you don't have the attributes to stand out in front of some of these other guys.
Mm-hmm.
So without the opportunity to compete and show off your greatest attribute, which is to win, right, you're getting further and further pushed down. And now you get hurt on top of it. So your world and your sort of confidence foundation is crumbling beneath you. You overcome all of that, come out of it throwing harder, being bigger, and putting yourself in a position to essentially capitalize on the fact that the world has basically taken a break for a year and a half in the game of baseball. How confident are you going into that 21 spring training?
I felt like I had nothing to lose, so I just went absolute balls to the wall with explosiveness. As soon as I went out there, like the first bullpen, I just was throwing at max intent. I really wanted to show them that like I was nonstop working throughout the whole entire COVID year, and because like they have no measurement, the only
Right.
measurement is how you show up to spring training. So I really needed to stand out, physically speaking, to show like how, because you guys haven't seen me in over a year now at this point, along with a bunch of other people. So you're going to be under a microscope with everyone. And how am I supposed to stand out the most? So in that 21 spring training, I was just literally going out there with, let me just attack, throw as hard as I can and see what I can do. And it ended up working towards my benefit where I was, throwing very hard. And I did get carried away a little bit because I was starting to tinker away with what made me a good baseball player and what got me drafted. And I started to throw a little bit more four seamers, which messed with me a little bit because I was trying to chase that velo, which worked and I guess tricked them, I'll say, being like, wow, this kid's throwing hard, but it wasn't me. It wasn't the metrics or how I was as a thrower because I'm predominantly a sinker ball pitcher, whereas those really
Well, you were
started
a
to-
thrower. You weren't a pitcher anymore.
Yeah, I was just trying to throw the baseball as hard as I could, and all my stuff played up because of throwing harder, as it usually does. And you know, they liked that a lot, and I was shocked when I saw my name on the board where I didn't go to low A. There was all these kids, and there was for my class, everyone went to either extended or low A, and I was one of about 3 or 4 names from my class that actually went to high A, and I was like, "Oh my god." And they made me a starter there, and I was like, "This is the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my life." Like, wow, they like me. And that was like the first like, wow, like I'm kind of making it here. Like I did it. Like I like now
Yeah,
like I'm a minor league guy for them now. They actually think I'm good.
I have 3 phone calls that I've had with you in my entire life that I don't think I'll forget. That was one of them
Yeah.
when you called me to explain that because it was the first time the other was what I had mentioned before, where, I finally broke your spiral of negativity by getting you to laugh at the fact that stuff wasn't going to be getting any better. But this one, because the difference in your voice and the difference in your tone was that you had done it. You were no longer
Yeah.
going up a hill. You had basically gotten to the top of your mountain per se, or at least to a plateau point, and there was a moment of satisfaction, which sucks in retrospect. That A, I didn't say something right then, but also B, that the way you're designed, and what all listeners will find out in a second, is that was one of the most detrimental things that could have
Yeah.
happened to you.
It was the best feeling in the world at that time when I found out that like, wow, I'm skipping a level. Like now what kids don't understand is like, if you were in my position or if you were at that point in the Rays minor league system, this is when the Rays were so good and they still are. They won every level in the minor leagues. They have prospect after prospect. They have great draft class. The market for their talent is so saturated. And the fact that I was one of the guys, they're like, no, let's actually skip the Sorsa over low A and let's put him in high A. And I was like, oh my God, is this happening? Like, this wasn't some crap org with no prospects or whatever. Like, this is the Rays. Everyone knows, like, okay, the Rays farm system is really good. They have great players, blah, blah, blah. And I was just shocked. And I was still shocked from that. And I kind of let that shock carry into the season where it was just like, okay, let's just like play now. Let's just like get through this season. It wasn't like fighting behind the 8 ball. There was no drive and and then I was thinking about, oh, well, if I got to high already at like 20, however old, at 22 or 23, then let's just try and get to AA. And then it was way too much for me to handle mentally. And I ended up having one of the worst seasons of my life. And then halfway through that season, they send me down to low A, ironically. And that's when everyone from low A that I skipped over was then skipping over me. And then to finish that year, I was back behind everyone because I had to wear it down there. I was not moving it on no matter how good I did or what I was doing to show that like, okay, wow, this kid's still really good, and have that like, okay, we got to fight now. Everyone that level or in that organization won a championship in the minors that year. So it was like even our low A team that won a championship wasn't even special because high A and Triple-A did it. And the big league team won 100 wins and won the division. So it was just like I was lost in translation. I was like, well, back down to square one again. And the fact that I was still there and I didn't get released was like, okay, well, at least they're holding on to me. That was the only saving grace after that year. So
and obviously a very tumultuous time in your life, a lot of alone moments there, I'm sure, that you had to battle through. And I don't think people really appreciate that oftentimes is when, these guys are going through the minors, you're alone so much and you're alone with those thoughts. And sure, you can make phone calls and shoot, I've handled plenty of yours, but it's different when you hang up that phone and you're just still sitting there and you have to wallow in that. You have to climb back out of that. So talk to me about how do we end up getting back to AA or getting there in the first place?
Well, that was something that when I was in the minors, I never thought I would get to, because if I thought I would get to AA, that's when I was like, okay, this might actually happen. Like I always thought, like if I could just get to AA, there's like a 0.00001% chance that I might be a big leaguer. And at that time, being an A-ball, it's like, because when you're an A-ball, it's like there's a lot of people there. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I remember when we first got drafted, forget about all the all-stars that we had on our team. Everyone on that team, we're all just like, God, we're just so good. That kid's going to be a big leaguer. That kid's going to be a big leaguer. That kid's going to be a big leaguer. We're going to have like 10 or 12 big leaguers. When in reality, like 1 or 2 kids, maybe 3 from a draft class will be a big leaguer out of 40 that are drafted. And having a lasting impact and actually playing more than a few years, good luck. So the higher up you go, it just is like getting to AA is such a big deal, because it's like, okay, I made it out of that A-ball pool, where now it's like I'm playing, big boy baseball. This is the men's league of baseball. This is when stuff starts getting real. This is where you might have some or coach with big league time, or players that actually played in the big leagues, or some that are sent down, whatever. And it's like, wow. And when you're young in pro ball and you're just coming in, that's a lot to wrap your head around. And getting to that point was in 22, the offseason of 21 to 22. After I got sent down, I had that bad year. I was like, well, they're still hanging on to me, blah, blah, blah. So I had a really good approach and a really good plan coming into the season for 22, where it was like, okay, I figured out how to throw hard. And I actually finally developed a strikeout pitch, where for the first time in my life, I had more strikeouts than innings pitched. And
which was your slider?
Which was my slider. And I ended up really being an east to west guy and finally learning what I need to do to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to be. I'm a crafty lefty, sinker ball, sweeper, pitcher. And I was finally getting cemented into a foundation as to who I am as a pitcher. Then heading into the 21 to 22 off season, I was like, okay, I'm very confident. I know what I'm going to do. I know how to throw hard because I just did it last year. And now I finally developed the pitch, but I never blended the two in between. So all that I kept talking about was like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it, blah, blah, blah. But that off season didn't go my way, where I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do because I was invited down to a velo camp with the Rays. And that put a wrench into everything, because it took the control out of what I wanted to do and put the control into what they wanted to do. And it was a velo camp where, if anyone knows anything about baseball and velo camp and build up stuff, it doesn't work. And it's almost like a recipe for disaster. It's almost like they're setting you up for failure, where they took me and these 3 other guys that were good, had something outlierish, but let's try and make them even better by adding velo, because then all the expected Excel spreadsheet stat stuff will go off the charts if we can get them to do this.
Talk about the injury rate from that.
The 3 kids that did it are no longer playing baseball. They all blew out. And after that camp, I thankfully, knock on wood, or I didn't get hurt, but I ended up throwing significantly slower from it. And it put me behind the 8 ball the whole entire season. It messed me up. And I went into that thinking, wow, if the Rays are going to help me throw hard and they are constantly good with player development, like I'm going to be great. I'm going to be a big one. I was so confident. And then my first pen after that velo camp, it extended because it ran longer. I was behind the 8 ball with everybody. And I was like, well, this is like, I throw my first pen and I'm not throwing hard. I'm throwing slower. I'm throwing 85. And I'm like, oh my God, like my career is going to be over. And then they put me back in high A. And I wanted to go to AA because I thought maybe I was good enough and I did really well in spring training. But put me back in high A. I'm like, great. Now I'm stuck in high A. I'm back in a class of kids where that's the draft class behind, or 2 draft class behind me, because 2020 barely even happened. So I was a 19 draft pick in high A with 21 draft picks. And I was a reliever, and I was like, and they just cast me.
You felt deep. You felt deep in the pool.
Yeah. I was casted out with the sodomites, and I just had nothing going for me. I was alone and I had nothing, and I had to really work my way out. And I remember telling my roommate, if I could make it out of Bowling Green again, I'll be able to do anything, because that was the biggest challenge for me at that time period, because that was a level where I failed at. I got sent down and I got my teeth knocked in. I was giving up a bunch of homers last year in 21, and now 22 hits, and I'm in high A, and it's like, okay, back to square one, like got to get out of here. And I just went back to that mentality of like, throw everything for a strike, get outs, and just at the end of the season,
Compete.
You compete, and at the end of the year, pick your head up and see how well you did. And I ended up having a video game type year with ridiculous numbers, like 1 ERA, 40 relief innings pitched, like a lot of strikeouts, 2 or 3 walks. It was ridiculous. And then halfway through the year, it was July 4th. After the fireworks, they called me in and they're like, hey, Skip wants to see you in the office. And everyone looked at me like, ooh, like you're getting called to the principal's office. And they were like, hey, you know, the manager was like, hey, I've been lobbying for you for a long time now, because I thought this is well overdue. You're going to AA, pack your stuff and get out of here. And I remember like, I wasn't even looking at him. I like crawled into this ball. I was like, oh my God, like it's happening. Like I'm finally going to AA. Like this is big league, or like this is like big boy ball now. And I remember that trip, I was like, wow, like I'm taking my first step into a larger world where the pool is, in my opinion, it's split into 2 demographics of like rookie ball, low A, and high A is like little kid baseball in the professional world. Whereas AA, Triple-A, big leagues is like big boy ball. Whereas AA is the lowest level of big league ball, but like it's over that threshold where like, okay, now we're starting to get serious. Where now you're facing the top prospects everywhere. Now you're facing kids that are going to be in the futures game. Now you're facing got maybe a guy with big league camp, or like these guys were in big league spring training against guys. And it's like, wow, you're taking that first step out of minor league camp into that new realm. And I continued the same mentality from my high A days to my AA days. And I ended up having a great year. I was the go-to reliever in the playoffs. And I ended up having an absolute fantastic season. And I was the 22 Rays reliever of the year. So it is quite the turnaround from 21. It's like, okay, like I'm like caught up now with where the race is with the guys that like, besides all the guys that have died out at that point, some guys have gotten released, some guys have gotten hurt. They're not playing anymore. They got like whatever. And now like, I kind of like now like the pack leaders, although it's way thinner now from our 2019 days in short season, I like caught up. And then heading in now, okay, have a great year, whatever, blah, blah. And
wait, let me cut in here. So now you come home, and the difference between the guy that just came home who made AA and the guy who made high A the last time and was as pumped, this guy who came home who made AA was hungry, and he was not happy with his current situation, or I should say satisfied. arguably a little too worried, and that got in the way of maybe some progress, but still had the fear ripping through his mind of, I may not be good enough to be here. I need to prove that I can survive and get past it.
Yeah. Because although my statistics were good, or I was able to compete and help win ball games, and I wasn't doing bad. I mean, every time I went out there, I was throwing up zeros. But I knew that, like, this is just Double-A. This isn't Triple-A, and this isn't the big leagues. My strikeouts went down. I was giving up a little bit more hard hit contact, and like I wasn't getting as many chases, and I was intuitively, I was smart enough to see that, and I saw.
It was also one of the first times I ever heard you admit, I might not be good enough if I
Yes.
have to be perfect all the
Yes.
time like this.
Yes, I do remember that, where it was like, wow, this is, even though I was doing well, I still saw that, like, the trajectory and the path of it is like, I might not be good enough. Like, this is scary. Like,
Yeah.
kids are good there. They hit the ball, they put the ball in play. They're not striking out on fastballs up anymore as much. Still were, but as much. And going into that offseason, I definitely was very hungry because I knew, like, I have a lot of work to do because I want to get out of Double-A. Because I remember, as hard as it was to, and as stressful as it was for me to even talk about or to think about or be in that time period, as soon as I got up to Double-A, I was with all those kids that I finally caught up with. And they're like, hey, congrats. Like, good luck getting out of here, because it's just as hard to get out of here as it is getting out of A-ball. And I was like, wow, like, this is going to be really tough. And this is just Double-A. This isn't Triple-A to the big leagues and blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot more to do. And heading into that offseason, I was definitely very neurotic about everything going on, because I thought maybe there's a chance of me going to big league camp, but there was also the WBC coming up that I could potentially go to. And I had to be ready for that. And I had to be perfect for that. And
The World Baseball Classic, by the way, WBC, and we were playing for Team Italy was what
Yes.
we were trying to go to. All right, so we're in this offseason, and now the World Baseball Classic is coming up, and Team Italy is, yeah, I mean, I remember you navigating the hell out of this, trying any way possible to get on this team. And you get on it. And let's talk about that experience.
getting on there was really important, and the main reason at the time why I wanted to do it. And I had a lot of help out from my agent, who I finally have a big boy agent who actually represents big leaguers and knows the ins and outs of pro ball and has connections. Along with the connection that I have through my lineage and my ancestry, I was able to play for Team Italy in the World Baseball Classic. And the main reason why I wanted to do that was because, although I was just the reliever of the year with the Rays, they still didn't want to invite me to big league camp, because maybe I didn't have the stuff for it, or I wasn't good enough. And, like, maybe last year was a fluke. Even after everything that I had to go through, going through that velo camp, having less velo, didn't have my stuff, but I had an unbelievable season. They still didn't invite me to velo camp, or to big league camp. And I knew that the only way at the time to go to big league camp to get that exposure was to play in the WBC, because there's an MLB rule where if you're playing in the WBC, even if you're a kid playing for Nicaragua and you're an A-ball, you have to go to big league camp. It's a rule that MLB mandated. So that was the number one most important thing, and getting all that paperwork and going through and making sure everything and all that crap ended up working out. It finally did. And now I was going to go to big league camp. And even then, my agent had to call them up and be like,
wait, whoa. We got to back up. Because Italy, although I know you don't have social media, so no, not anybody listening find anything out about Joe on his social media, but you did happen to go viral while playing in the WBC.
well, I was going to get to that. But what I was going to say is getting to that point, like, even, I just want to make it apparent that even then, they took like an extra 2 weeks to call me to tell me that I was going to big league camp, even though they had to.
Yeah, they didn't
They
want
released the roster or whatever. I wasn't on it. Like, the non-roster invitees for big league camp wasn't on it. And then Wayne was like, what are we doing? Like, you have to invite Joe. Like, he's going to the World Baseball Classic, blah, blah, blah. So when I'm in big league camp, it is like, oh my gosh, I'm around big leaguers for the first time in my life. I'm like on the same field with them. I'm throwing against them. It was an absolute dream. And there was a lot to happen in this past 23 season. And I loved big league camp so much, I didn't want to go to the World Baseball Classic.
Right, that's right. So you went there first and then
Yes.
had to leave.
And I had to go there for 2 weeks, and I ended up getting 2 innings before going to the World Baseball Classic in big league camp. And they were filler innings in the 9th inning when we were up or down, whatever. But I was facing other kids, other non-roster invitees in the big league spring training complexes. And that was a really big deal for me. So I got 2 innings under my belt, and then I have to go to the World Baseball Classic. And then from there, I get on a plane. I have about a 20-hour travel day to go from Orlando, Florida, all the way to Taiwan, to Taichung City. And then I meet up with Team Italy, and then we have all this and that. And then we go through it. We go through all that. And then that's when kind of like the story of me finally starts taking off, where like I propel my career. And that I'm convinced that if that time in the World Baseball Classic doesn't happen, I'm not taking seriously, and I don't become a big leaguer this year. No matter how good I do.
100%, 100%.
So there's all that going on. I mean, we have some big name guys. We got Matt Harvey kind of leading our team. We have Mike Piazza as a manager, and we have one of our field coordinators who probably was a reason why I pitched, because he's like, yeah, he's good. I played for him twice. I was always good under him. And, we're in the World Baseball Classic. We're playing some exhibition games against some Taiwanese teams, whatever, blah, blah. And I was doing well. I was getting outs, but like our team wasn't taking those games seriously. There was like errors in the field. We had a catcher catch a ball against me and like bring it into the dugout, and then a run scored against me because he thought there were 3 outs even though there were 2, and I'm screaming like 4, like. So in the exhibition games, although I was doing well, like I was giving up runs. I was like, you got to be kidding me right now. Like, is this a joke? Like, I'm literally getting outs, I'm getting weak contact. I have like a 43-mile-per-hour exit velo off a bout that goes under the third baseman's glove, ends up being a double because it was so slow. Then a pop up, and like these exhibition games, I'm like, I'm doing well and I'm giving up runs right now. Like, is this a joke? So finally, we hit our first round of pool play, and we're facing Cuba. And I come into a big situation. It's like second and third, or there's guys in scoring position with less than 2 outs, and I ended up getting out of it. And I ended up striking out a big leaguer who was like on a roster who was playing for Cuba. And I remember so excited. I gave like a let's go, blah, blah, blah. And after the game, we won. I was like, okay, great. Italy beats Cuba. It was like, we beat them by like, maybe it was like 2-0 or something. I don't know. Well, like we beat them. It was a good close ball game, and we were all stacked or blah, blah. And I checked my phone, and I have like over 100 text messages. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah,
and
well,
like everyone,
you just downplayed that quite a bit.
No, that's not the one that you're talking about.
Oh.
That was just against Cuba. Then I see all this stuff like Fox Sports on Twitter has Joe Sorsa fired up. But all I did was just give like a little fist pump. I'm like, let's go. And like, that's it. And like, I had our GM texted my agent being like, hey, like, tell him good job, keep it up. I'm like, is this happening right now? And I thought nothing of it. I was like, I just came in for a relief appearance. I knew it was big, but like, I didn't think anything of it. And then my second appearance comes along. After all this, it's like, I'm getting all these texts, like, saw you on TV, blah, blah, like World Baseball Classic, like, everything. And then it all comes down to the last game of pool play. Every team is 2-2. There are 5 teams, or like every team was like tied. And we were in dead last in our pool. And we're all talking about like, we got to go to Japan. We're going to go to Japan. We're going to advance on and go to Japan, blah, blah, blah. And I remember this teammate of mine, he's like, guys, like, we're dead last. Like, everyone knew. We had the Italian government reach out to the World Baseball Classic, whatever, who's in charge, and told us, like, somehow squeezed it out of them. That was like, tell us exactly what we need to do in order to advance to Japan, in order to win. Because the next game we had was against the Netherlands. That was like a favorite to possibly win, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And every team was 2-2. So we couldn't just beat the Netherlands. So not only was that hard to do, to beat the Netherlands, they were the home team, all this and that. We had to beat them by a certain amount of runs scored. And I think we had to beat them by about 5 or 6 runs. So a big leaguer came in, loaded up the bases, got no outs. And for some reason, I was called upon. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, really? I'm going to be the one to blow this game to set us home? So I come in, Italy versus Netherlands, bases loaded, no outs. It's like 5th, 6th, maybe 7th inning, probably around the 6th inning or so. The score is 7-1. Bases loaded, no outs.
Up 6.
Okay? If I give up a run, it's over. We lost. Like we don't. We might win. We're not advancing though because
Right.
there was a certain amount of runs given up.
Right.
First pitch, I throw to Didi Gregorius, nice 0-0 slider, pops up to middle of the infield. I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, we got the leadoff out. Second batter comes up. I think I ended up striking him out. And I remember with 2 outs, I'm like, they're not going to score. And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to do this. Like, they're not going to score. And I'm like, and I remember I was like screaming to myself on the mound. I'm like, you're done. You're done. You're not scoring. I'm striking you out. You're done. I was using much more colorful language, and I remember once I got the 2 outs, I'm like, this is it. Like, we're going to do this. Get to 0-1, get to 0-2, ball just off the outside corner. And I remember thinking, like, we have big league umpires here. So if it was a ball, it was definitely a ball. And then I throw this perfectly executed 1-2 sinker down and in, lefty. And he ends up like giving like a swing, and I strike him out. And I'm like, oh my God, I just did that. And I freak the F out so much, and I just let it eat. I am fired up. I'm screaming, let's go. I am him. And I absolutely blow up. Our team is going crazy because everyone knew it wasn't about just getting out of the inning, but I had to protect the runs too. And then the guys that came in after me did a great job, shut the door. We ended up winning, and we are screaming. We're celebrating. Mike Piazza names me player of the game after that. And I'm like, this is, for an Italian-American New York Mets fan growing up, that was like, you pretty much had Jesus just come down and say, I'm rapturing you to heaven. So that happened to me. I checked my phone. I have over 300 text messages. My phone blew up, like so many missed calls. I trended everywhere. I had, like everyone talking to me. And then like there were guys from big league camp that were watching it. When I found out that I came back, like the managers and the coaches and the players there, they were like, oh, you were that kid, like great job. Like everyone actually knew who I was. I was like, this is unbelievable what just happened. And then we ended up advancing and going on to Japan and having a great time. And unfortunately we lost there, which was my fault. But that was definitely a little too much for me to take, because a guy that was just, I came into a very important situation, ended up facing Otani in Japan on their soil. And for a guy that only played in Double-A, that was playing in a major league playoff atmosphere,
Right.
I'll admit it was too much for me to handle. I wish I could have, and I tried as hard as I could. There was just the nerves there. I just couldn't do it.
The moment got you.
It no matter what I wanted to do, no matter how calm I tried to make my mind, my body was just moving a different way, and I couldn't control the baseball, and ended up giving up runs and ended up losing the ball game. And I mean, not even America could take them down, so it wasn't that bad because they ended up winning the whole thing. They didn't even lose the whole time in the WBC, but went down valiantly, fought really hard, and then I come back to big league camp, and I end up throwing in some more big league games because they're like, wow, like let's keep them around, whereas the majority of other guys they sent down, they actually kept me back there for a little bit to throw more innings. And then, of course, being the Rays, because they're stacked and they're loaded. After that, spring training, end up having a great spring training, doing all well. I'm not really throwing hard, but like I'm around the strike zone. I'm dominating guys. I'm getting outs and getting my lefties, blah, blah, blah. So what do? They put me back in Double-A. Then after 3 days of being in Double-A, they call me up to Triple-A. And once they call me up to Triple-A, I'm like, oh my God, like this could happen now, because getting out of Double-A was like, wow, this is going to take a long time. But after all that I've been through, being the reliever year and just having that to spring training and coming in and having doing very well in big league camp against big league hitters, I was in Double-A. I end up doing well for like the outing or two that I have in Double-A, and I get called up and they're like, we have to call you up to fill because all these other guys, like someone got hurt at the big league, so we got to move everyone up. And like, that's how the dynamic goes with baseball. And they tell me it's temporary, so like don't pack anything, just like bring something light, like you'll probably be there for a week. So I'm like, okay, but I'm still going to Triple-A. I'm like, this is sick. Like now I'm going to be with guys that are playing against guys on the 40-man. Like, so big league camp and the WBC really prepared me for the season. Then when that happened, I go up there and I ended up doing well, and I stay there. So all of my stuff is in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm playing there for about like 2.5 months. All my stuff is there. I have nothing. I'm living out of a hotel since day one of the season. I've been living out of a hotel. I didn't have my car. I had no clothes. I had no laundry done. Like I'm living like an absolute barbarian Neanderthal. I have like constantly just traveling from place to place, living at hotels. Like it was a lot to handle, even though, and like being on sleep deprivation. Like I was like 3 hours of sleep, and like the next day I had to play in Triple-A, and like that was big and like it was tough. And I'm there for 2.5 months or so, and then after being there for a while, I keep thinking like, oh my god, like I'm can they just finally call me to like go down and get my stuff? Like what's gonna happen? I just want to be reunited. I want to have some type of safe foundation. And the exact opposite happens. I end up getting called up to the big leagues in between the middle of a game, in between innings, and I'm like, oh, and oh my god, can't even give it a justice as to what went through my mind and what I was feeling. But the fact that I just kept on moving up and they needed me more and more, and the demand for me, and like guys kept getting hurt and I kept doing well and they just kept moving me up. And I'm like, I remember just feeling something in my head being released where I felt like I was in a dream and like I died and went to heaven. And my manager, he calls me down from the bullpen. They're like, bring the Sorsa in here. And I remember we had some big league vets in the bullpen, and everyone was speculating because I was supposed to start on Saturday, but they scratched my start because I was like opening or whatever. And they had me, it was like between the sixth inning of a game. And they were like, have the Sorsa come down in the bullpen. And once the guy got off the phone, he's like, yeah, Joe, they want you in the dugout. And I remember everyone being like, ooh, and all the big league guys, the guys with service time, they were like, last time that happened to me, I got called up to the big leagues. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, go into the dugout, you'll find out. And then I'm in the dugout waiting for the inning to end. And then our manager calls in everyone. He's like, guys, come here. He's like, hey, wait, who's leading off? He's like, all right, Brujan, go on deck. He's like, everyone else, come here. He's like, guys, he's like, there's probably a better way how to do this, but I just found out the Sorsa is going to the big leagues. Everyone in the dugout, in the middle of a game, between people are like sides are being exchanged. The Gwinnett Stripers are going out to the field. Everyone starts screaming. I literally turn to my coach, my manager, and I'm like, are you serious? He's like, I don't joke about this shit, bud. And I hug him and I literally just start like crying. I can't control myself. And I'm like, I did it. I finally made it to the big leagues. Like part one of the two parts of getting to the big leagues and staying to the big leagues is done. Like I'm going to get called up. But even then I was like, I'll believe it when I see it, because they had a kid get called up to the big leagues that spent 7 years on a minor league contract with the Rays, was in the bullpen against the Yankees for 4 days, got called back down and DFA'd, and then he got hurt, and then he didn't play, and he never pitched in the big leagues. And I remember thinking, like, just get me to that field first, and then just get me on that mound and let me throw that strike, and then I'll say I pitched in the big leagues. But right now, in that point in time, I was on a flight. I was like, wow, I'm going to head to the show. And then because everyone knew how much it meant to me, how bad I wanted it, and how much I constantly talked about, like, man, I don't know if it's ever going to happen. I don't know, man. Everyone knew how much I vocalized myself about it and how much it meant to me, that it was almost like when I got called up and I told them, or when they found out, they were so happy for me. And then I called my family. Everyone was in absolute shock that I think they couldn't even get words out. And of course, I had to, for some reason, the one game of a year that a team plays an 11 a.m. game, that was the game that I was debuting. So I had to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning after going to bed at 1 because I couldn't fall asleep. 2 hours of sleep deprivation, get on a flight to Tampa, go down there and face the Dodgers. And I was warming up and my family was there. And I remember thinking the crowd was so loud and everything. And I'm like, is this happening right now? Now, our closer ended up getting out of it, but I was like, okay, like, well, that was sick. I'm probably going to go back down to Triple-A. And then they ended up bringing me on the trip to Chicago. I'm like, oh my God, I'm traveling with the team now. I'm on this first class flight, and it was a family flight. So it was an absolute, like just ridiculous fight where you have babies being changed in front of you and everything and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't really get to experience a show flight first. But then once that happened, we're in Chicago and I'm seeing Wrigley Field and I'm standing on there and I'm just like, what is going on in my life right now? Like this path that I'm taking, this whole entire trajectory, everything of like from the start of this year to now, like I don't have any of my stuff. I literally have this little like weekender bag full of clothes that I have. That's like my only means of clothes. I don't have big league clothes yet. Like I had to go out and shop to look better and all that stuff. And it was just unbelievable. And then it's Memorial Day. Stroman's pitching a one run shutout. And it's the 7th and the 8th inning. And I'm sitting in the bullpen and they call down and all these other guys get up because it's a 1-run ball game. We're only down by 1. And I hear our longtime pitching minor league coordinator, who's now the bullpen coach of the Rays, who knew me. He's like, all right, got it. Yeah. All right, Jojo, get hot. And I'm like, I literally like, me? He's like, yeah, get hot. And like all the other vets sit down, I get warm. And this is a 1-run ball game, Memorial Day, sold out at Wrigley Field, 42,000, however much it is. And I'm warming up. I'm like, is this happening right now? And then he gets the call again. He's like, yep, you're in. You got next inning. And then I'm like, I'm going to debut. And then when I throw my last pitch, like ball hits the glove, walk out, trying to control my breathing. I'm like, this is happening right now. 25 years of my life, this moment is leading up to now. I'm finally going to debut. The service attendant opens up the gates, Wrigley Field. I end up walking out and I see this packed crowd. I literally feel like I'm playing baseball in 1915 because of how old the stadium is at Wrigley Field. And I'm jogging out and I don't feel anything. I don't hear anything. I feel my spirit leave my body. I almost like am looking at myself from third person. I didn't know what was going on. My girlfriend and my brother and my teammate and like my sister-in-law and her sister were in attendance. So like I had some people there, and that was such a magical moment for me to have that, and or someone in my family to experience that. And then like I get on the mound, I toe the rubber, and I'm just like looking around for a quick second. I'm like, this isn't real right now. I am in Wrigley Field making my debut against the Chicago Cubs. And the first hitter that steps in the box is Dansby Swanson, someone that like I've looked at as like this absolute stud all-star baseball player. I'm like, this is going to be my first batter that I face. Our catcher, Christian Bethancourt. And I never knew I was going to be against big league players because I never really faced a big league player, like kinda at all. Like I felt like the WBC, but like it didn't really count because it was like, oh, that's like third party type of stuff. Like
Right.
big league camp, I was facing other prospects that were like Triple-A guys, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And Swanson steps in the box. Bethancourt calls a changeup. And I'm like, this is going to be my first big league pitch. Let's see what happens. Throw a changeup and it like it's like this big fat crack of the bat. And I'm like, I don't even want to turn around. I'm like, that's going to go out. That's going to go out. That's going to go out. And I see a Rosarena just kind of camped under it, hits his glove, out number one. And I just felt this giant, one pitch, one out, giant sigh of relief. And I'm just like, I just got my first out in the big leagues. And then from there on out, I just went like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, punched out a few. And then I end up having 2 scoreless. Great debut. And it was so good that they they were like, you know, this kid's pretty good. Let's bring him on to Boston. And then I end up traveling to Fenway for my next outing, which was like a long relief outing, which then all you guys came and a bunch more people came. It was a cold, wet, terrible Northeast rainy day. It was a doubleheader game that I ended up being a long relief guy for, and I was facing the Boston Red Sox, and I ended up holding my own, doing pretty well, 2.1. And then in between games, so like there's so much more to keep talking about, but in between games of the doubleheader, because the Rays are very analytical with what they do with their management and very on top of what they do. In between doubleheaders, I get called in the manager's office. I'm like, okay, like here I go. Like I'm gonna get sent back down, and they're like, we're gonna designate you, which means designate for assignment, which basically for the big league side of things means you're getting cut. And I'm just like, okay. And they're like, do you know what that means? But like I had them explain it and elaborate it to me, and them going through that. And like I knew at some point or whatever, because it was the Rays, I was probably going to get DFA, but I was like, I held in my emotions, wore it like a man, wore it off the chin, was very professional to them about it. But I was like, wow, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And then there was a time period where I wasn't allowed to play for a week because I wasn't on a team. I was on waivers and I was going to get claimed by teams. And I was like, I might not be coming back to the Rays. This team that drafted me, that brought me up from low A to the big leagues, that I have over 4 years of time with, I might not be with anymore. And that was so weird to be like, all these guys that I'm so close with, that I've been roommates with, that I've been at war with for years now, I might not ever see them again. And then my agent calls me, and this is during that DFA 1 week period where I'm trying to get claimed off waivers, and my agent calls me. He's like, you just got claimed by the Washington Nationals. I'm like, what? And this is all during my first season with like my rookie year. And like, this is so much for me to take the I haven't even been, forget about home. I haven't even been back to my apartment where all my stuff is. Then during that week period, I don't know what's going to happen. So the Rays finally, like once I get DFA, they're like, where do you want to go? Like, well, back to Montgomery, because that's where all my stuff is. Go there. go drive all the way, get a flat tire, of course, halfway through, have to stay in Atlanta, go to Durham, North Carolina, collect all my things, and I pack up my car. I'm like, I don't know. I could be staying here, but I also could be going somewhere. I don't know. So I find out I'm with the Washington Nationals, and then all that happens, report to Triple-A, and I'm like, this is so weird. But the hardest thing for someone that just debuts coming back down to Triple-A is they're an absolute prima donna diva. And I knew that no matter like how hard I tried, I could not be like that, because the last thing you want to do is be that kid that debuts. And this happens to everyone that debuts that then has to get sent back down. That reality check comes in where they're like, well, I'm better than this. I just debuted. Like, but there are guys in Triple-A with, like, we calculated at one point, there was over half a century of big league service time on our Triple-A team at some point for the Rochester Red Wings, which is Triple-A affiliate for the Washington Nationals. There's that much experience. If I was going to be a rookie with a week coming down to the Washington Nationals and this new guy that they just claimed and being like this prima donna, I'm better than the minors, I just debuted, I would have had another thing coming. So I had a really good instinct about that, to act very humble and down to earth about everything. And then my story with the Nationals takes off from there. And I love that organization. I love the guys with it. I love being around them. Whether it was Triple-A or the big leagues, it was just an absolute blur of a time because it was so much fun. It was such an unforgettable experience, but the fun or the easiness didn't stop there, because from that point, they ended up 2 weeks later, after I was back down in Triple-A, or 3 weeks or so, they ended up calling me up to the big leagues. And I'm like, wow, I'm going back to the big leagues. And I remember I was just as excited as getting called back up to the big leagues as I was when I first debuted. And this is a lot going on in my rookie season. So I come up with the Nationals, and like I'm the only lefty that they have in that bullpen at the time. And they're like, wow, we could really use it. We need a lefty, blah, blah, blah. And from there on out, that whole season was great. I learned so much at the big league level, but I was getting optioned about 7 or 8 times, which they made a rule for, that you can only get optioned about 5 times. But when you get recalled because somebody gets hurt, on paper, it doesn't count, but your body is still moving. So the amount of times I'd have to wake up, find out at 12 at night that, hey, you're going up to the big leagues, getting sent back down when I do well. I mean, there are so many things I could talk about. It just
right. Where was the travel? How far is that travel every time that happened?
Rochester, New York, to sometimes I was flying back to Chicago. Sometimes I was going to Washington or to Atlanta or somewhere. So it really could have been wherever. But sometimes I was hopping on a plane from Rochester to go to Washington, and then to go to San Diego, and then to Seattle. And there were times where I would wake up in the middle of the night and I wouldn't know where I am. It would take me about 30 seconds to realize where I am, because like, I don't know where my body is. My mind hasn't caught up to where my body is yet. And there were times where like what I went through was so difficult this year, where I would come up, go to like my first big league win, 2 scoreless, 4 punchies, big league win. Come in Tuesday after the off day, yeah, you're getting sent back down. Then I'd come back up. I'd go like 3.2 scoreless against the Dodgers, get sent back down. Then I'd come up, do bad, stay. And then it made me realize like, okay, nothing is in my control. And that made me grow and realize a lot, that no matter how you're feeling, you have to go out there, you have to compete and do the best you can do, because it is out of your control. There's nothing. And there was so much stress of when the first 2 or 3 times that I was getting optioned, I was like, man, like, what do I got to do to stay here? Like, this is what everyone talks about, staying in the big leagues. Oh, it's so difficult. And I learned real quick how hard it is to stay in the big leagues. And it is no joke. And that is a whole nother 2 hours that I could just talk about how difficult that is. But the fact remains that what I realized at the end of the year is there was so little out of my control that all I could do was just stay healthy and throw strikes. It's literally the only thing that I can control. Stay healthy and throw strikes. And if your name is called, you're lucky enough to go out to the field, just compete, throw strikes, and do the best you can do. What I learned too is, and there are times that you can be on point and you will get lit up and give up 4 runs. You can have the perfect, wow, that's the best minute. You get your track man back. Wow, that's the best plot I've ever had. You get lit up. That was the best location I've ever had. You get lit up. Then there are times where you don't even think you should be in pro ball because of how bad your stuff is, how it's not moving, how your velo's down, and yet somehow that's your best outing. And what I realized, it's almost like with me at the end of the year, it was like a flip of the coin with how well I do, because it was just like, well, let's just see what happens. And thankfully, they ended up keeping me on and having me finish the end of the season, which I'm very thankful for. And ended up finishing the season with all that I had to go through after everything that I just talked about. I had a great year, got DFA'd. I was with 2 teams. I was optioned up and down. It was WBC, and like still being without my car for like 3/4 of the season, have like nothing. going my way. And like, I finally look up at the end of the year and I'm like, finally take a deep breath. And I'm like, wow, I did it. I debuted and like, I just took like a final big sigh of relief. I'm like, it's over. Like we can get into the off season. We can finally just relax. But it's not about like, oh, I made it. It's about because like how I've been talking this off season and how much bigger of a step I need to take in order to be better is every single season from here on out is only going to get more and more harder. There will be more scouting reports on me. Players will face me more times. People will know exactly what I'm going to throw. It's going to get harder where, like you could be throwing, I could be in a bigger role. I could then be in a contract year down the road. Like it's going to get harder and harder. And it's not like, oh, I made it to the big leagues. I'm going to kick back and relax. But it's rather, I made it to the big leagues. I have, like as the saying goes, more power, more responsibility, and it is going to grow exponentially. And from there on out, I know how much harder I need to work and how much more is at stake because this is the one thing I've ever wanted to do in my life. And this is something that I will do whatever I need to do to stay and play as long as possible. Because there are vets that have played for over 10 years that they want to keep on playing because they know how much, even though they have all the money in the world, they have all the service time, blah, blah, blah. They want to keep playing because they know how much it means to play in the big leagues. And that is what I'm going to aspire to do for the rest of my life or for the rest of my playing career. But right now, there's no, oh, we made it, we're good. We did it this year. It's more of like, there is a lot more that I need to do and get ready for and train for. And I need to be prepared for it for next year because it's only going to get harder and exponentially the years after that.
We've obviously had these circumstances in our life where we've rested on the success that you've had. Now you realize that's not, while it's not even allowed, it's just not a possibility for you because you know what to expect in the coming years. What advice can you provide to athletes? And, whether those are athletes that had a similar track to you where they were late bloomers, underdeveloped, or didn't get that. And then also the athletes that are the studs, the phenoms, the guys that are getting professional looks early on. How do you advise those people differently? If so,
I would say you can never rest on your laurels because no matter how confident you think, how hard you work or anything, or how good you are, someone is always going to be out there hungrier than you, more motivated than you, wanting it more than you, that will do more than you with less money, with less to give up. There is always going to be someone always gunning for your spot, trying to take your job. You can never, as soon as you take your foot off the gas pedal a little bit, you will be bumped back more pegs than you think. And it will be 10 times harder trying to get back to that spot and to progress forward from there. So that's really what I'd tell kids. I would tell kids, you cannot take anything for granted. If you do, the higher up you go. Now, there are times where you're in a pool of people where maybe you're in high school or college where you might be able to take advantage of that, but you won't see it yet. And you won't see the ramifications until down the road, just like everything. But the higher up you go in a profession where the market is so competitive, you're going to see it that much more magnified. And where I'm at right now, being in the Triple-A big league level of trying to be at the high, I mean, there are guys that even in Japan that like it is the most honorable thing to leave the country and go play in the MLB because that's how important playing in the MLB is.
So do you think you'd be where you were if you were a guy that threw exceptionally hard in high school?
No.
So you think you needed the element
of... Well, it depends what my mentality was with that. But that all dissipates, and those hard throwers that have this stuff that like what I've kind of found is the key theme that I've found between all big leaguers, because everyone is so different. You can't compare one another to like, oh, well, he's here because he works the hardest, or he's here because whatever. What I've found with every big leaguer is everyone has an extreme love of the game and understands how much it means to be at that point. Whether you're someone like me that has idolized being a big leaguer as like that is the all end all being in life. If you do that, that's better than being the president of the world or the United States, or be better than the Pope or anything. That is like, you're above all if you're a big leaguer, in my mind. Then there are some people that are drawn towards the game that maybe they might not like baseball, or maybe they treat it more as a profession. It's like, yeah, the MLB is the MLB. But there are some people that like, oh, but that money though, like if they're coming from dirt poor nothingness from the Dominican Republic, and that's all the means of monetary value that they'll ever make in their life, and they know that this is my one and only opportunity to get my family out of poverty, maybe to bring them to Florida or something like that. They are driven by something so much that is what I found everyone, whether you're a kid that doesn't pay attention to baseball, that's in the big league, that doesn't follow anything, that doesn't even know how many
So
teams
even
are on
the
the league.
ones that make it look easy still have that drive.
They are driven by something more than anyone. And
So it's an obsession.
an obsession in some sort, absolutely, because the kids that are really good at a young age, they're probably playing, if we're just going to make this broad, they're probably playing that sport because someone else is going out and recruiting them to help them look better for my team that they're controlling. And they just keep on bringing a horse to water, bringing a horse to water. And then once it gets tougher and tougher, that kid doesn't want to work that hard. And oh, well, like maybe I'll skip this practice. Maybe I won't lift this hard. Maybe I won't find more intuitive ways to be better than my competition. But I know that every kid that I played baseball with this year, every guy that I played baseball with in the big leagues or even in Triple-A that's trying to get to the big leagues, and everyone wants it just as bad as everyone else. And the guys that are the highest level want it even more, and they will do whatever it takes. If they have to kill someone, they'll do it. And that's how competitive it gets. And and that's why it's so hard and stressful sometimes, because on those outings where you want it so bad and you go out there, you're pounding strikes, you're moving great, but somehow the team is just able to score runs against you. It's like, great, well, now I did bad. Now they're going to option me down. And then they do. And then your worst nightmares come true. And then somebody else gets an opportunity. Then you're like, this is hard. This is really hard, where no matter how hard you try, you can still get bumped down. Somebody else can come up, get a better opportunity, and do better than, maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe they'll just play in a scenario where they get called up and it's a rainy day and the team is on a getaway day and they just don't want to play. And that team just kind of rolls over and just hitting everything. And they throw 2 innings at 15 pitches. And it's like, what the heck? And then you come in a, midsummer's game and bases loaded, and all the team's going to do is just wait for their pitch, and then they just smack a grand slam. It is so difficult, and that's why they say you got to ride the wave, when in reality it's just like you just got to put up with it and just keep on moving forward. So that's really a long-winded response to what I tell kids.
Very good. Well, listen, first off, once again, thank you for doing this. Your story is quite spectacular. You do a phenomenal job of illuminating it. And, obviously we all are, but me in particular, I am unbelievably anxious to continue watching as this will perpetually unfold. And I think the greatest point and the greatest takeaway for everyone is, we often shy away from obsessions because they've been villainized, or we think they're wrong for us to have. But if you look up and down anybody, no matter the profession, and you try and find those who are massively successful, they are obsessed with being successful and obsessed with accomplishing whatever that highest route might be. And they build another mountain when they find the top to the current mountain that they're on. And I think you've consistently had to do that in your career, and will continue to do it, and have learned very well how to continuously build those mountains. So we thank you again for this opportunity and for sharing your story, and look forward to having you on in the future when you can give more words of wisdom.
Yep. Thank you very much for having me.